Welcome to ND and NO, the podcast inspired by our favorite quote, self-advocacy is BS. It empowers neurodivergent folks to say no to what doesn't work for them and yes to what does. Brought to you by Umbrella US, the ND23 project, and hosted by me, Genie V, this podcast is your self-advocacy sidekick. Whether you're a neurodivergent self-advocate, a caregiver, an ally, or curious about advocacy in general, this podcast is for you. You get no more, if I can do it, so can you, narrative. None of that, if you have money, you deserve care, BS here. Episodes feature captivating conversations, interviews, and expert advice on self-advocacy with a focus on community care. We know that self-advocacy only works when there is access to the support and care we need. And what does that mean? Without community, self-advocacy goes nowhere. Join the movement toward true self-advocacy where we know that without community support, self-advocacy is BS. Subscribe now to ND and NO, and let's journey from overwhelmed and undervalued to saying no to what holds us back and yes to what helps us move forward. I am your host, Genie V, and today I am very excited to have award-winning author Mary Robinette Kowal. I want to take just a moment to provide some visual cues for our audience. I am a transgender woman. I am in a light gray dress and have auburn long hair flowing down past my shoulders. Around me, I have some of the things that I love as a nerd, including stuffies and board games and comic books and just the huge amount of my life that is nerddom represented here. Mary Robinette, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Let me give a brief visual description of myself. I am a white cisgender woman in my mid-50s. I have curly reddish hair, which looks very brown in this lighting. I'm wearing a black turtleneck with constellations and a blue cardigan that I crocheted myself. I'm sitting in front of a red velvet curtain that is hiding the closet that's behind me.
Awesome. So, I was introduced to you through the fandom of actually Patrick Rothfuss. And I had the opportunity to see you do a podcast with him. And that's what really opened me up to reading the Lady Astronaut series. Now, before we get that, I want to ask something because this is something that I love. I'm fascinated by this, but I would love to know what new word has Elsie learned?
So the latest, we've actually been on a little bit of a hiatus of adding new words because I ran out of space. So for people who are like, who is Elsie? Elsie is my cat, and Elsie uses buttons to talk. So she has a vocabulary of about 120 words, and she is. It's like having an ESL toddler who is an alien covered in fur. So I'm having a conversation with a non-human intelligence on a daily basis.
Okay.
So most of the time she's using these words, but I will tell you the latest word combination that she came up with because it blew my mind. She had been saying a combination of water and box, and I couldn't figure out what she wanted because, like, she has a box. I'm like, I don't think you want me to put a bowl of water in the box. And then she finally said bathroom, water, box, and then walked into the bathroom and meowed very loudly at the shower. And in the shower, I had been, she loves yarn, and I had been blocking a cardigan, and she wanted to get to it. So all of the combinations had been her trying to get me to open the shower so that she could get to the yarn.
Oh my goodness. That is awesome.
Yeah, it's wild. It is unbelievable.
you just recently had on your own podcast Bunny, who
Yes.
hit internet fame as a speaking labradoodle. And
Yeah, I just still have the prop in the studio. Yeah, Alexis Devine has Bunny is the guardian for Bunny, and really the reason that I started on that journey with Elsie. She's delightful. She's also neurodivergent herself. I highly recommend reading the book, which is full of, so I am Bunny. It's about her journey with Bunny. The subtitle is How a Talking Dog Taught Me Everything I Need to Know About Being Human. And it's all about self-advocacy.
wow,
It's
thank you
really,
very
it's
much.
fantastic. It's a bunch of small essays. It's very digestible and it's filled with wonderful, wonderful photography.
That is awesome. Thank you very much for bringing that to my attention.
Mm-hmm.
So now to the subject at hand. The Lady Astronaut series that I reference is not your only series, but it's the one that captured my attention as a neurodivergent person. Can you kind of give us a little nutshell of what the series is about?
Yes. It's basically, I describe it as Apollo era science fiction. In 1952, I slam an asteroid into Washington, D.C., which was not wish fulfillment when I wrote the book, and it kicks off the space program fast and early and with international cooperation. So it's basically imagining what the Apollo program would have looked like if we had continued to throw money at it at the rate that we were doing, and also what it would look like if it had 100% more women and people of color. My main character, Elma York, is a mathematician, but she also has a social anxiety disorder, a PTSD, and she wants to be an astronaut.
She also happens to be of Jewish heritage.
Yes.
And so not only is she marginalized through her experiences, but also through her ancestry.
Correct. Yes.
And with this being right on the heels of World War II, she has her own experiences, but also shares some of the glimpse of an American post World
Mhm.
War II.
Yeah. And when I was writing the book, I really wanted her to just be a character who happened to be Jewish, but also have her faith affect the way that she moved through the world. So it's not about being Jewish. And I don't think that if I had made her a Christian character and she had the level of Christian faith that she has of Jewish faith, that anyone would have noticed it.
Right.
Which says a lot about where we are in the world.
Exactly. So how did Elma come to life for you?
She started in a novella that I wrote called The Lady Astronaut of Mars. And that was a story in which she was in her mid-60s and faced with a decision about about taking a last mission as an astronaut while her husband was terminally ill. And my publisher asked if I would be interested in exploring a novel. And the backstory for Elma and the world was this meteorite hitting the Earth. So I decided to push all the way back to the beginning of that to when the asteroid strike happens, and that meant exploring Elma and figuring out who she was and how she became known as the Lady Astronaut of Mars, how she got to Mars, what her early life was like.
And it is the way you bring all of those, qualities in that she possesses in her background, but also in a super easy narrative, so that I mean, as somebody who has experienced what I call a frittata of neurodivergence, it is so easy to read and capture the full essence of who she is.
Thank you.
And so thank you so much for your unique style. I've had the opportunity to pick up some others. I just finished the Ghost Talkers.
Oh, thank you. That is one of my favorite things that I've written, and I always feel like it's my forgotten novel because my book tour started on election day of 2016.
Oh my gosh.
No one noticed that book. That book may
Yeah.
as well just not have come out.
Yeah, I just finished it and was completely captivated by it. So
Thank you.
that's awesome. Now, Elma is a representative of mid 1950s, early and mid 1960s society.
Mhm.
But she exhibits what we now sort of classify as neurodivergent conditions. I noticed PTSD was part of it, anxiety, panic disorder was part of it, but she also shows this giftedness with numbers and math and spatial equations. But the thing that caught me is that her giftedness and her PTSD intersected. And how did you, I mean, a lot of people when they write a character who has experienced trauma, they go to the more typical things such as abandonment or assault or violence or abuse. How did you come to that intersection?
So I tend to feel like the more specific a trauma is to a character, the the more textured and real it is.
Mhm.
And some of it, in hindsight, at the time, I don't know how much consciousness there was when I was writing this. Some of it in hindsight is that I was a gifted and talented, in the gifted and talented program. And a lot of the things that I face as an adult are probably because of that.
Mhm.
And because I was in, undiagnosed ADHD and depression, like neither of those were on the radar. So I was constantly being told, "Oh, if you just applied yourself."
Yeah.
So there is, I think something that happens to a lot of people is that there's something that is easy for them. They don't realize that it's easy for other people, and other people don't understand why it's easy for them. And there's a punishing thing that will happen where people will make fun of you in order to reestablish feeling a feeling of equality, which is not what's happening. Everybody has something that they're good at
Mhm.
that other people aren't. All the things that you think are easy are probably things that you're good at.
Exactly. And also as gifted and talented and somebody who was, sort of lifted up as one of those examples.
Mhm.
Uh, if something was easy for me, it was like, well, look at this, look at how they're doing this, or being paraded in front of people in different settings when that was not socially comfortable for me. It was like, why am I so special? Why do I deserve all of this attention? So yeah, I can definitely put myself in some of those shoes.
Yeah, yeah. The nice thing I will say about one of the side effects of landing in a high school that was a gifted and talented one was that I did just blend into the crowd.
Yeah. I was in a rural community in southeastern Oklahoma. I was the nerd in my class.
Yeah, yeah. No, I had a circle of nerds, so I was
All right,
very
that is
fortunate.
awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, the for anyone who does, you know, history and especially the space program, which by the way, you have talked to astronauts and astrophysicists and you get super nerdy with the details
Yes.
in this book about just the orbital mechanics and the realities of making a trip to the moon and then to Mars. So people who understand that history know that it is, I mean, being an astronaut is not glamorous. It
It is
is
not.
um the scene with Elma having to clean up the clogged toilet. Um
I found out after the book came out, that on the ISS, so clogged toilets happen with the same frequency that they happen here on Earth. Toilets are
mhm,
toilets, right?
yep.
And then you have the addition of, oh, it's zero gravity. But I found out that what they the disinfectant that they use in the toilets that's just there
Mhm.
turns the urine bright purple and acidic. And I did not know that. And I'm like, oh, such a missed opportunity.
Absolutely. And you know, for anyone who thinks that, you know, it is the glamour of space, Elma becomes sort of this picture of actually all of the stress
Mhm.
and all of the weight that each one of them carries. In addition to, you have the global calamity of a meteorite and the loss of almost all of her family.
Yeah.
So for many of us, you know, who may be neurotypical, looking at that, they think this is unrealistic. But for those of us who are neurodivergent, that level of trauma, that level of impact is something that we have to learn to be resilient with. So how do
Yeah.
you feel that Elma's resiliency can help others
I
in
think
facing difficult situations?
so. I think there's a couple of things, depending on where you're standing. If you're standing outside of the trauma that's happened, I think that it can give you some insight into what's happening in someone else's brain when they're dealing with these things. Um, some of the best emails that I've gotten have been people who have said, you know, I suddenly understand my, you know, friend, spouse, partner in ways that I haven't before. But I think that if you are inside it, this is the other one that the other category of email that makes me get teary every time I get one. Elma has a number of different calming rituals that she does. One of them is she does a Fibonacci sequence. She counts pi. She does these different things. And I had an email from someone who had experienced something traumatic and said that they found that they started doing Fibonacci sequences in their head now as a calming mechanism. And it doesn't have to be that, but I think that having a touchstone, recognizing that what is happening to you is scary, your feelings are real, but that you're not actually in danger. And having something that can give you a bridge across to the point um, where you can reconnect with your body and what's happening.
Yeah. And I thought it was so appropriate for the character to go to mathematical grounding, because there are a lot of people who will talk about uh, the five senses grounding technique, or you know, breathing or things like that. And
Mhm.
Elma's sitting here doing complicated math. Well, it's complicated to me because
Yeah,
I'm an everyday math person, not Fibonacci sequences and all that. So it was so appropriate to the character,
yeah.
and
The
it was
Fibonacci one is one that you can do, um, although I can only go so far because it's adding and adding in my head is not great. But,
right.
um, yeah, but when she's doing primes and square roots, I'm like, "That is me in a calculator."
Exactly. um, and I'm just, you know, this is just out of my curiosity. How much of you bled into Elma?
So, Elma's journey with medication, and deciding to medicate and admitting that she had a problem is my journey with depression. For her, it was anxiety. For me, it's depression. I have had panic attacks that were definitely were situationally based. Um, I was working for a theater company and being sexually harassed on a daily basis in my 20s. So weirdly, I kept thinking that I had the flu. I couldn't understand why I was nauseous about going to work,
Yeah.
and that then I would decide not to go, and then I wouldn't be sick anymore. It was so strange. took I read my journals from that time, and I just want to scream "get out" at myself. So those the physical sensations are coming from Elma. I am an at at worst an ambivert, but definitely I'm like, oh, there's a stage. Hello. Come out of theater. I'm not afflicted with a social anxiety disorder, but I have family members who are.
Right.
But the scene when she goes and talks to the doctor and says, I think I have anxiety and I don't know what to do about it, is basically verbatim the conversation I had with my doctor about depression. It was when she said, I said, I don't know what to do about it. And she said, that's what I'm here for. And I still cry just remembering how compassionate she was. And she had that box of tissues in my hand so fast.
And the interesting thing, and I don't know, maybe this is just me being a history nerd and also my sort of intersection with medical field, but the way you wove in Milltown, which was just this brand new drug, this was a cultural phenomenon that we don't even see now.
Mm-hmm.
We have commercials that promote these designer drugs, but this is not like what it was like in the 1950s, is it?
No, it's really fascinating. There's a great book called The Age of Anxiety, which talks about this and the Milltown phenomenon. Basically, there was this brief period of time when anxiety and mental health was normalized because everyone was taking Milltown, and it was depicted as this completely safe, uh, this innocuous drug that would just level you out. And it was not. It was highly addictive. It was actually a real problem, and the pushback to that, or not the pushback, the backlash to all of the addiction that was happening, to all of that, caused much of the mental health stigma that we have now. But even before that, like when you are looking at um, uh, Louisa May Alcott, she's got a book, Old Fashioned Girl, which was one of my favorite books. And it's absolutely dealing with depression and completely normalizing it, giving great advice on how to deal with depression, which I still use today. One of the best ways, I'll just give you some Louisa May Alcott. One of the best ways to get out of a funk is to do something nice for someone else. And I still do it. And so then this stigma arose around it, around medicating. Everybody was afraid that they'd just become drugged out of their mind. Nobody wanted to touch medication at all. And the ripple effects of that we're still dealing with. And I suspect we're also going to deal with the ripple effects of the opium epidemic around pain management.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, this is one of those situations where that which can help is misunderstood by the fear of the harm it could do.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Now, you mentioned your own, fight with depression. You've also talked about, your experience of ADHD. You also use TikTok to, deal with some of these things head on. What forms of advocacy for yourself do you find to be some of your best?
For me, the one of the best things is actually a thing I haven't talked about on TikTok, but something that I got from dog training. Bear with me. And it's when you're trying to deal with we're trying to deal with my dog like running off after things. Squirrel.
Yep.
So her trainer said that basically a distraction is a normal environmental response that is inconvenient. So it's normal to want to be interested in a squirrel. It's just inconvenient for the human. So in
Right.
this case, I am both the dog and the human.
Gotcha.
My phone, when it makes a pinging sound, picking it up is a normal environmental response to that. But it also completely derails me. So with a dog, you can do one of two things. You can remove the stimulus, or you can retrain so that you have a different response to it. So examples. So what that means is that one of the things I do for myself is I limit the number of distractions that I have. I use freedom. I time block. I will talk to people and say, and my husband, my family is now trained that if I have it's a literal tiara. If I have my writing tiara on, that they are not to speak to me, even if I'm up and away from my desk, because I'm still in writing mode.
Right.
And so that's a way of removing that stimulus. And then with the phone, like my urge is to reach for it and look at it. But one of the ways that I can kind of derail that is I have a glass of water. I have a sip of water before I look at it.
Oh.
And so you can start to, and that can often, like while you're having the sip of water, gives you enough time to be like, do I actually need to look at that right now?
Yeah.
So it's imperfect. Like my dog is still going to go after a squirrel sometimes.
Right.
But it does reduce the incidence, and it also helps me feel more comfortable with my decisions. Like it one of the fun things about the ADHD depression convergence is that when I get distracted by something and then don't do the thing that I wanted to do, I feel worse about myself, which makes me more distractible.
Right.
And then I get this spiral. So recognizing and trying to redirect early is some of the best self-advocacy that I can do for myself.
That's awesome. I just have to know, did you buy the tiara or did somebody gift that to you?
I bought the tiara. Well, actually, no. First, I was given a very tiny tiara, I think by Ellen Kushner and Delia Sherman. I think they had a bunch of tiny little birthday tiaras left over, and then I got a really big fancy one. I would put it on, but then I would have to write.
But that in itself is self-advocacy to go out and find this object to not only be a marker for you, but also a marker for others. And saying, hey, look, I appreciate that you love and want to be around me, but this is my boundary. So
Yeah.
that's fabulous. I love it.
It's one of my favorite things. And I only get to wear it when I'm writing or on my birthday.
Okay. Very fair. Elma's support system is interesting because she has this widely diverse group of people. Her husband, her her colleagues who are also mathematicians and brilliant. The women, the 99s. If people don't know about the 99s, please go and learn about them. This was a real group of women.
Still is a real group, actually. Yeah.
In fact, there is a museum that highlights them here in Oklahoma City that I've been dying to go to. But she has this group of very divergent people who are a part of her support system. They build community for her. How have you found community to be supporting in your experience? One, as a writer, but also as you've kind of come to grips with your neurodivergent journey.
So I would say through the other piece of self-advocacy that I've done, which is that I've started just being honest about what's happening.
Mhm.
And being honest about what's happening with my brain gives other people the opportunity and the tools to help me. So, you know, some of it is simple things like someone spotting a video and saying, "Hey, this made me think of you," and sending it to me. That's like a really low lift, very, very helpful. When I'm having a really, there was the last 3 years have been extremely rough. There's been a lot of caretaking, and so I've sent a message to a circle of friends and said, "Hey, you know, things are really bad right now. Can you just send me uh, random photos of pretty things or pretty or cute?" And then just periodically, I will get cat pictures, flower pictures, small children with like, oh my god, the amount of frosting on this child's face. And it's just these small touches that remind me, one, that I'm loved, and two, that there is joy out there in the world. And they have been like, that's one of the best, simplest things that I've done. And I do it for other people when they're having rough times. Um, Talking to my husband when I'm having trouble with deadline and
Mhm.
saying, "Hey, will you sit down with me and go through my calendar and help me time block?"
Yeah.
Because that does two things. I will show up for other people in ways that I won't show up for myself. And
Right.
so if he has taken time out of his schedule to help me figure out my schedule, I will be disrespectful to him if I don't do that.
Right.
And so so it helps me get out of my loop and reframe the things that I'm doing.
Now this is okay. This is out of you discuss that, and all of a sudden this little brain bubble pops. How much do you think that those of us who were raised in the South are very enculturated to do just that thing, to show up for other people but not for ourselves?
Um, I yeah, it's a real thing.
Yeah.
So there's a thing if people want to go and this is on my TikTok. I talk about this ask versus guess culture. So there's two types of culture in the world. Big spectrum, okay,
Mhm.
obviously, but on opposite ends of the spectrum are high context cultures and low context cultures.
Mhm.
And high context is a guess culture, and a low context is an ask culture. I did not come up with the ask and guess, but basically, in the high context culture, you have a whole bunch of contextual clues that you know from the way things are around you, and so you will um, try to meet the expectations. It's the way I describe it is. That rather than wanting to, you don't want to put someone in a position to have to say no,
Right.
because saying no is rude.
Mhm.
And even though saying no is setting a boundary, and that's all it is, but
Yeah.
you're raised that way.
Mhm.
um, and so the way I think about it is actually that you don't want to have to put someone else in a position where they have to set the boundary.
Right.
You want to try to anticipate their boundaries and respect them. And
Mhm.
so by saying things like, this is a conversation that I had with my mom. There's a bag of apples on the counter in the kitchen.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, yeah, I can have a pie for tomorrow night. And my husband looks at us and he's like, you, where did the pie come into the conversation?
Right.
And I'm like, well, she said she had a bag of apples on the counter in the kitchen.
Mhm.
And he looks at her and he's like, did you want her to make a pie? And she's like, well, yes, if it's not too much trouble.
Right.
And And he's like, "Well, how did you know that that was what she wanted and not just offering you an apple?" And I'm like, "Because if she was just offering me an apple, she would have cut up an apple and put it on a plate. But it's a bag of apples on the counter in the kitchen."
Yeah.
So what she was saying is, there are tools there. If you want to use them, they are available for you. but I'm not going to put you in a position where you have to say no to me and set a boundary. Like,
Right.
I'm just going to give you those tools, and if you want to use them, they're there for you.
Yeah. The one that sticks out to me is my mother, as we were growing up, would always, sort of in that tone of a mother, say, you don't ask somebody to give you something that they have. You
Mm-hmm.
let them give it to you, or you don't ask to go to somebody's house, you let them invite you.
Yeah, it's letting other people have the opportunity to be a hero.
Yeah.
And if you are not from that culture, it's also a form of gatekeeping.
Yeah.
And it can come when you move out of that culture into a low context culture. In a low context culture, um, these are cultures where often with a lot of different people, different cultures, like big cities tend to be low context,
Mhm.
because you cannot assume a shared context. And
Right.
you, therefore, what you assume is that setting boundaries is okay and
Mhm.
it's not a problem. And that if you ask for it, somebody else sets a boundary, no problems.
Yeah.
But what happens when you have those two people meet is that the person coming from low context is going to assume that the person from a high context is passive aggressive, and the
Mhm.
person from the high context is going to assume that the low context person is pushy.
Yeah.
And if you don't have those conversations, neither, like, whichever style you're from is
Mhm.
going to feel normal and comfortable.
Right.
I've heard people say, "Oh, you know, the high context is terrible to for someone who's neurodivergent." And yes, if you are not from there,
Exactly.
but if you're from there, you know the rules.
Mhm. Right. And a lot of times we sometimes will look at the experiences of neurodivergence and we'll say, well, that's just the neural wiring. Well, part of that neural wiring was the cultures we were brought
Mhm.
up in.
Yeah.
So, let's be honest about these things and say, look, if we were told that's how it was done, then we can learn to do something new.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, the
Um,
mistake is making the is the or not mistake, the challenge is that there are so many different communication styles.
right.
And if you if you are working under the assumption that everyone communicates the same way, in the same way that if you're working on the assumption that everybody's brain is wired the same way, you're gonna run into problems because neither is true.
Right. Absolutely. My last question that is sort of formal in this conversation is one that you brought so much intentional representation of marginalized communities through just these side characters, but also the main characters in the story. Even you know Stetson Parker, who is this jackass of a human being, becomes personable when you realize what is happening behind the scenes. There's a lot of focus today on representation of neurodivergent people, and sadly it is overwhelmingly white, it is overwhelmingly privileged. What barriers do you feel are most critical to dismantle this so that we can raise awareness and increase representation of those who aren't represented?
I think the one of the biggest areas I is access.
Mm,
Um, that there are a lot of people who have wonderful stories, and they do not have access to the time or the resources or the channels to share those stories.
yeah.
So finding ways to provide access, whether that is um, acting as a shield in a boardroom setting, um, whether it is depending on your means and abilities, whether it's making a donation, whether it's acting as a mentor, whether it's just sometimes stepping back. I think making access is one of the things that is the simplest and most necessary of tasks.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for being open and transparent and vulnerable with us in some places. What is next for Mary Robinette? What are you looking at in the coming future?
Well, I am turning in this week The Martian Contingency, which is book 4 in the Lady Astronaut series. That'll come out in 2025. And later this year, and I'm sharing it with you all early, later this year, we will be doing a Kickstarter for a collection of Lady Astronaut stories. The only time they have been collected, all of them, is for a French edition. So this will be all of the stories plus a brand new one.
Oh, yay! I can't eat enough. I can't consume enough of these stories. I love them so much. So this is very exciting. Thank you so much for giving us a little bit of a sneak peek on that. You've made my day. In addition, I am just a fan.
Oh, thank you.
This has been very meaningful for me on a personal level. So, Mary Robinette, thank you so much for your time, for your energy, your passion, your storytelling.
Well, thank you for making this space and for the advocacy that you do. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
All right. Thank you very much. Everyone else, thank you for being a part of our show. Thanks for listening, because ND and NO is a podcast dealing with neurodiversity and self-advocacy. It is for those who want to advocate for themselves and allies. This is a monthly discussion, and it comes to you every 4th Thursday at 11:30 a.m. U.S. Central Time. If you or someone you know would like to be on the podcast, be sure to let us know by filling out the Share Your Experience form at umbrellaus.org. If you're catching this live on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel for updates on this and other Umbrella US events. And finally, if you'd like to support the podcast, be sure to leave a rating and review and share with your friends. To donate to Umbrella US and learn all the latest from us, visit us at umbrellaus.org and follow on your favorite social media platforms. Thanks again, and see you next time.